Phone In Live. Coming to you live from Missoula Community Access Television. Located in beautiful downtown Missoula, Montana. Now, here's your host, Neil Chase.
Good evening and welcome to Baha'i Phone In Live. I'm Victor Woods, your host tonight, sitting in for Neil Chase. Our show, Baha'i Phone In Live, is unique. It's unique because the second basic principle of the Baha'i faith is the independent investigation of truth, and that nobody can make you believe in something without you first investigating it. And this is why we have our show tonight. So when we have a talk here, you can phone in to the station, we'll put you on the air, and we'll answer your questions directly. We're having a guest speaker tonight, Ann Rubens. She's going to be speaking on prophecy in your pocket. It's going to be a very interesting talk, and I'm sure you'll enjoy it. Now I'd like to introduce our speaker. She's a member of the Second International Baha'i Council. She has appeared on radio and television broadcasts throughout the United States, and she's a professional photographer here in Missoula. Ann?
Well, thanks for that great introduction, Victor, but, I really don't have anything to talk about tonight, so I would rather just leave. So if you don't mind, can I just have a buck so I can go get a pop or something and just watch you for an hour and a half?
You're just going to leave?
Yeah, you know enough about the faith to tell these people. I just don't have anything to say.
Okay.
I'm sorry. So thanks for introducing me. I'm sorry. I'll see you later.
Okay. Well, we did have a speaker for you.
But wait a minute. Victor, have you ever looked at the back of a dollar bill? Why are all these symbols here?
I don't know.
I've always had this fascination with symbols. And you know what a symbol means?
No.
It's something that stands for something else. So the things that are on the back of this dollar bill, they must mean something. I don't think they're here just for a decorative purpose. And I think that maybe I can talk about this. Maybe we can figure it out. And I think that by looking at these symbols, maybe each of them are a little bit of a part of a whole story. And I think what that story is that God has a plan. And his plan is to have his kingdom established here on earth, that we can live in and have a civilization with justice for the first time. And each symbol that we're going to go through on the back of the dollar bill that you carry around in your pocket all the time, have you ever even looked at them? Pull one out tonight maybe and follow along with us as we're going through these. A lot of the reasons why we don't know much about what the symbols mean is because the information by the people who put the seal together were really a part of a very secretive society. And the dominating influence, in fact, in the formation of our very government was expounded upon in lectures, dramatized in rituals, and summarized in the symbols of Freemasonry. Now, there are many misconceptions concerning the Freemasons, and I want to set at least one thing straight. And you can tell that they know what's going on because of the very preface in their Masonic Bible. It says, "The brotherhood of man and the fatherhood of God." They believe in the one true invisible God, and this one true invisible God has a plan. Now, there were many famous Freemasons. Paul Revere, for instance. Did you know that he was leaving a Freemason meeting when he set out on his famous ride? And of the 56 signers of the Declaration of Independence, 50 of them were known to be Freemasons. And this included George Washington and Benjamin Franklin. In fact, when George Washington was getting sworn in at his inauguration, nobody had a Bible. So somebody ran across the street to the Masonic Temple, and they picked one up. They opened it up to Genesis chapters 49, and then George swore in as his presidency. This same Bible has been used time and time again by the presidents of the United States. In fact, George Bush just used the same Bible on the same page when he was sworn in. Now, in 1935, it was Franklin Delano Roosevelt and his vice president, Henry Wallace, who were responsible for getting the symbols on the back of the dollar bill. Previously, they were just used as a seal to stamp on official documents and letters and whatnot. Both of these gentlemen were indeed 32nd degree Freemasons. Now, Manly Hall, who is an expert in Masonic lore, states in his book titled Secrets of the Ages, "The Great Seal of the United States is the signature of a secret and august body in Europe which financially and spiritually aided the founders of this nation at the time of the American Revolution. This organization helped the founders establish the United States for a peculiar and particular purpose known only to an initiated few." Now, this initiated few were those who belonged to the Freemasons. And the value that they place on their secrets is very evident in the oath that they must swear by when they join the Freemasonry. They must say, "I promise and swear that I will not write, print, stamp, stain, hew, cut, carve, indent, print, or engrave the mysteries of my order under no less penalty than to have my throat cut across, my tongue torn out by the roots, and my body buried in the rough sands of the sea." That's how secret their secrets are. So they successfully concealed the real meanings of the symbols by placating the public, you the public, with an array of very simplistic interpretations, like the 13 stripes is the 13 colonies, etc. But what we're going to talk about tonight goes way beyond that. Now, of the many designs that were proposed, this is one of the first ones. And on this side, I'm going to read to you what the official description of is. It says the first design, dated 1776, included Pharaoh sitting in an open chariot, a crown on his head, and a sword in his hand, riding through the divided waters of the Red Sea in pursuit of the Israelites. Hovering over the sea was a divine pillar of fire, meant to symbolize a divine presence. The rays from this pillar were beaming to Moses, who was standing on the shore, extending his hand over the sea, overwhelming the Pharaoh. Now, this certainly isn't what we see on our dollar bill today. Why? Because it's too obvious. Here we've got a manifestation, Moses, and a symbol of God right there. It's way too simple. So they had to come up with something a little trickier so that they could hide their secret. Now, what's interesting is the slogan, "Rebellion to tyrants is obedience to God." Now we have, "In God we trust." to take care of those tyrants. It was the 13th and final designer was William Barton. Now 13 is a number that appears 8 different times in the seal. And in fact, William Barton has 13 letters in his name. I mention this because in numerology, this is a number for death and rebirth, or purification after a refinement. And this is a very important theme throughout the symbols on the dollar bill. What's interesting is that 22 years after Congress adopted the seal, Charles Thompson, who helped Barton, sent a letter to the Secretary of State, which began, "I wish to explain what was expressed covertly by the seal." Yet the full text of this letter was never published, and it was mysteriously lost. So we could have all known what I'm going to tell you tonight, but it took a little bit longer for it to come out. Now, if we look at the whole seal, we'll see over here the great state of the United States. And the 2 dominant symbols on the seal are the phoenix and the Great Pyramid. Now, I know confidently that this is the Great Pyramid because the very casters stated, regarding the reverse, the pyramid is drawn in scale to the Great Pyramid. The side seen in perspective to the right side means east, this view being desired. East is significant to all the world's religions, for that is the area that their promised ones came from. And in fact, the Native Americans looked to the east for the return of their promised one, who has since come. But you might want to know, why is an Egyptian monument on the back of an American piece of currency? I mean, there's so many other symbols that we could have had. I mean, we certainly don't have the Queen of England on the back of our currency. Why an Egyptian monument? It's because the Pyramid of Giza is a book in stone, and it's written with a message of universal importance to all. Now, if it's a message to all, we need it in a language that all can understand. And the only universal language that exists is mathematics. Now, at the time of the construction of the pyramid, Cheops was the reigning pharaoh. And at that time, the people were worshiping the sun, the moon, and the stars. Now, the time when the pyramid was being built, Cheops was visited by a foreigner from the northeast. And he was called Imhotep, or Enoch is another way to say the same name. Enoch was the establisher for the manifestation named Adam. Now, Adam was not the first man on earth. He was the first God-conscious man. And he was the first of 9 manifestations who have taught humanity the revelation of God to the capacity that they could understand. Now, these 9 manifestations listed here are Adam, Moses, Krishna, Zoroaster, Buddha, Jesus, Muhammad, the Bab, and the founder of the Baha'i Faith, Baha'u'llah. These gentlemen were like the grades of school. They would come, each building upon the teachings of the predecessor. Adam came along and said, all right, I'm like kindergarten. All you have to understand is that there's one true invisible God. Quit worshiping the sun, the moon, and the stars. So Moses comes along and says, okay, Adam said worship the one true visible God, that's right. Now I'm going to give you 10 laws to go along with that. And they continually progressed until we get to the university education that Baha'u'llah gives us in his great and grandiose revelation. Now, each of these had an establisher, and their establisher helped them spread the message throughout the world. For instance, Paul worked with Jesus, Ali worked with Muhammad, Kazus worked with the Bab. Excuse me. Enoch was Adam's establisher, so he had to know Adam's revelation so he could teach it just as well as Adam. So Enoch approached the Pharaoh with a proposal to preserve the teachings of Adam in this book of stone. Now, this required the help of people who work with stones called masons. These are the original Freemasons. Enoch laid out a plan that was specific and precise, and every detail of the construction, including the materials used and where they would originate from, was included in this plan. One such requirement was for a specific type of black chocolate rhyolite, called rhyolite. And this was to be used in two places, in the coffer that would be located in the king's chamber and in the capstone, which was actually never placed on the pyramid. So Enoch came over to the Americas, he obtained enough rhyolite to do the job, traveled down the Mississippi, spent some time in the Yucatan Peninsula, and then booked back over to Egypt. No problem, right? Oh, well, I suppose you want proof for this, right? Well, okay. It's a pretty good story. I wouldn't want to tell a story like that without some proof. You know, us Baha'is, we're big on proofs. The first proof is that they had the capability of going there. This was made able by the first ship that they used in order to go across the ocean. These ships were actually buried in boat pits near the pyramid. This is the ship when it was underneath in the boat pit, and this is the ship when it's been constructed. These were ocean-going vessels. They were capable of that kind of travel, and they used the currents that are in the oceans to come over this way. So they had the means to do so. The second proof that Enoch came over to the Americas is the cropping up of a variety of pyramid cultures all along the route that I mentioned that he took. Enoch was the best of the best in pyramid architects, so everybody wanted to learn from him, and it was his job to teach. So as he came over here to get the rhyolite, he also came here and he taught those people how to build pyramids as a symbol of their worship to the one true invisible God. So all along the Mississippi River, we see the burial hills of Colorado, the mountains in the Painted Desert in Mexico, the dwellings later in Mexico, and down and through the Mayans and the Yucatan Peninsula. So all along his entire route, these pyramids cropped up. Now you can see a lot of them, especially in the Mexico area, in the Yucatan Peninsula. There are many, many pyramids, I'm just dotting them quickly, of the many stepped pyramids in that area. These pyramids increase in sophistication the more you go south. He must have liked it there, he spent a little more time there and taught them more carefully. These pyramids are more similar to the Great Pyramid in Egypt than other pyramids that also are built in Egypt. For instance, if we look at one detail that's in the Great Pyramid of Giza, this is the king's chamber that's in the Great Pyramid of Giza. This is the chamber that is in the Temple of Palenque. This is a very unique design to have a very tall stacked chamber. This is inside the pyramid, above ground, and have these various levels that are very distinct and separate. And then they're followed in the base by a type of grand gallery. These similarities in design, to have these similar type of towers, to have pyramids built entirely of stone, to have the chambers above ground, etc. There are many, many similarities. Again, are only similar to the Great Pyramid of Giza. If you took the Pyramid of Giza and compared it to another pyramid in Egypt, nothing's the same. Why is that? It's because they had the same teacher. And this teacher had many different names. As he traveled through these different cultures, they just gave him different names. He was put in stone as a great relief to his greatness in the Itza area. This picture is titled Itzamna in his prime. Now you can see what's unique about this is that this gentleman has an Egyptian headdress and an Egyptian beard. Now in that area of the country that was not standard at all. So this was a shrine or a monument to their great teacher, and this great teacher was none other than Enoch. Now there's one more proof for this. If you still don't quite believe me that Enoch came all the way over to this area and mined the rhyolite from the Wisconsin area. When you mine or pick up any type of rock, it has like a fingerprint. It's built up of a variety of a composition of different elements, and these elements exist in a varying amount of degrees depending on where you pick it up. So if I pick up a rock on the south side of town, it might be different from the pick up a rock on the north side of town, and I could break up their chemical composition, compare it, and show the difference. So someone else was curious. They wanted to know where was the original quarry of the rhyolite used in the chambers, in the coffer and the capstone in the Great Pyramid. So they took a sample from the Great Pyramid. Then they took samples for comparison from there's only 3 other quarries in the world where you can get this stuff. One is practically right across the river in Egypt. Another one is in the Lake Victoria region in Tanzania. And the third source of this rhyolite is in the Great Lakes area near what's now Wisconsin. Now, what you do is you take you break down the rhyolite and you look at each of the different samples of it. There's this plagiocese feldspars, orthoclase feldspars, quartz, muscovite, biodite, pyroxene, hornblende, carbon, and iron. These are the things that exist in rhyolite. Then you compare the degree to the pyramid that each of these exist. The solid black line represents the Great Pyramid. That's the one that we want to match the closest to. The next line is from the Udufu, Egypt quarries, and then we get the samples from the Lake Victoria region, and then finally the last line is the samples from the area near Wisconsin. Now this first one, we'll just go through the numbers. Plagiocese feldspar, in the pyramid it exists 40.47%. That's the number we want to match or get closest to. In the sample from Egypt, it's 40.84. The next sample has 41.80, and then we get 40.46 from Wisconsin. So that area in Wisconsin is the closest. But that's not really you shouldn't just base your proof on one sample. So let's look at another one. Let's look at quartz. We've got 13.96 of quartz in the Great Pyramid, 15.78, that's quite a bit of difference, 16.03, and we get 13.96 in Wisconsin. Again, these two lines match up the closest. The easiest one and the most dramatic difference is found in carbon. In the Great Pyramid, there's 0.15%. There is virtually non-existent, 0.01%. It's non-existent in the third sample, and then from the sample in Wisconsin, you get the same amount, 0.15%. So without a doubt, it proves that Enoch came over to the Wisconsin area and mined from there the rhyolite that he needed. And this carbon that comes from forests. So that's how he came to this deciduous area. And that's why, again, we know that it's from Wisconsin without a doubt that he came, along with all the other proofs that I showed you. So now we can actually get into the pyramid, because the pyramid's on the back of the dollar bill for a reason. We're supposed to look inside of it. So we're going to go through some of this. Now I'm just scratching the surface of all the information that's contained in the pyramid. It's a whole other lecture onto itself, but we're going to get into the good stuff. This is an overview of the pyramid, and we want to take a good look at this because I'm going to be breaking down and just doing close-ups of some of these sections, so I want to give you an idea of where I'm at in the pyramid. You can see this is the whole pyramid, and these are the chambers inside of it, so you kind of get an idea of how it is. We've got the base level here. This chamber right here is called the descending passageway, and it continues all the way down into a pit. Intersecting with it is the ascending passageway, which leads directly into the Grand Gallery. Off of the Grand Gallery, we can take another chamber and go into the Queen's Chamber. Or if we continue up the Grand Gallery, we get into this King's Chamber. And again, all of these chambers are above ground. Now, in order to unlock the mysteries of the information contained in the pyramid, we need to look at its dimensions. And this is how we get the key. We get these dimensions by measuring. Now, in order to measure, we have to have some unit which unlocks the information in the pyramid. And the unit of measurement that's used in the pyramid is called the pyramid inch. This is the key to the whole puzzle. This number is exactly 11/10,000ths greater than the British inch. And the reason that it's greater is because the British inch was originally stored on a piece of teak wood and it shrunk. It was the hardest known substance at the time, but it shrunk anyway. And it shrunk just that little bit that makes the difference between the amounts. But this chart shows that this is also a measurement in nature. If you take the polar diameter of the Earth, and this is a number determined by NASA, and divide it into 500 million segments, this equals the pyramid inch. So by applying the pyramid inch to the structure in the Great Pyramid, it unveils a wealth of information. Now, for instance, we can get, by looking at the outside of the pyramid, the actual length of days in our solar year. And this is determined by measuring, this is a top view of the pyramid, from measuring from corner to corner. Strictly straight corner to corner. We do not follow the indentation pattern. That gives us another year form. But by following from corner to corner all the way around, we get this number. We divide it by 100, and we get 365.242465. And this is the number of days in our solar year. So there it is, contained right in the outside of the pyramid. But it gets better. And this really astounded people when they discovered this, that the pyramid itself contains the value of pi. Now you have to remember, this was built in like 3434 BC. Now the pi gives us the means to square a circle, so a circumference can be, an area can be determined. The ratio of the height of the pyramid, which is right here, to its perimeter equals the ratio of the radius of a circle to its circumference. And when we actually measure it out, we actually get, when we use the formula for pi, circumference divided by 2 times the radius, we get the value of pi. Piazzi Smith, who was one of the first pyramidologists to actually use accurate measurements, said not one out of all the other 37 pyramids in Egypt has been proven to be endowed with this proportion even approximately. So it's pretty astounding that it contains this. Now on the outside of the pyramid you can get a wealth of information, like I said, but we're not going to get into all of it. You can get the distance from the sun to the moon, the earth to the moon, the weight of the earth, even the mean temperature of the earth, etc., etc. And if you're curious about more information, just call the Baha'i Center and we'll tell you all about it. These scientific facts on the outside of the pyramid act like a flag, like pay attention to me, because look on the inside and you'll get the spiritual story. So they're kind of like a flag, like pay attention, like I said. Now the first person to actually go into the pyramid was a gentleman by the name of Al-Mu'min. And he was interested in finding celestial maps, maybe even some treasure, why not, for his libraries. So he searched the outside of the pyramid for 2 weeks. Now at this point, the pyramid was completely covered with a highly polished white marble, which was later removed to help rebuild a city when there was an earthquake. But at this point, it was completely polished and smooth on all 4 sides, and everything looked the same. He was looking for some kind of entry or doorway. Couldn't find it, he couldn't find it. He tried chiseling it, hammering it, nothing worked. So finally, they went for the primitive method. They doused the sides of the walls with cold vinegar. After they had heated up the walls with fire, then the cold vinegar would cause the rocks to be brittle. Then they would bash at it with battering rams, and they would just burrow their way straight through into the pyramid. So what they did was, this was the outside casing stones. They burrowed their way in, dug, a long time. They were just about to quit. And then a workman heard a stone fall, so they changed directions a little bit, and lo and behold, they finally broke into a passageway. And you can imagine how happy they were after all that digging. And you have to remember what inspired them was treasure. That's what kept them going. So they finally broke into this passageway, and they're faced with this huge white marble block, completely filling the passageway. So they're like, well, no problem, we dug through that much, we can dig through this too. So they bashed through this white marble block. Well, they're faced with another one. Okay, we'll bash through that one too. So they bashed through it, and they're faced with one after another, marble block, 10 marble blocks block the entire passageway. They finally got through all those, and they continued up the descending passageway, and they discovered the door that they'd missed, and it actually was a tricky door. It swung on the inside, so that's why they couldn't see it. But that was it. That's all they found. They're just about to give up, and they notice a type of red granite rock that was different from what they had been digging through, sitting on the floor. They look up, and there's a piece missing from the ceiling. and it looked like maybe there was a passageway. So they decided to start breaking through that. So they busted through this red granite block, found another one, broke through that one, and there's another one, and boom, they break through that one. There's 3 granite blocks blocking the passageway. So then they said, well, forget it, we're just going to dig around, dig around this passageway. So what they ended up doing was digging around, but they discovered that there was 3 red granite blocks completely clogging the descending passageway, 12 white marble blocks covering the passageway, and then 4 of these red granite girdle stones. So there's these different types of stones at specific different intervals in the passageway. It seemed pretty mysterious. So finally they got through the ascending passageway, they scrambled up into the grand gallery, nothing in their way, they got into the king's chamber, they're ready to find it, they're just ready to see those maps and that treasure sitting there. What do they find? An empty, lidless box. It was a coffer, and it was lidless, and it was made out of that black rhyolite granite that we talked about earlier. No body, no treasure, nowhere. Why? Because there wasn't supposed to be that physical body. The treasure that's contained in the pyramid is the spiritual information that's contained when you measure the different blocks and the different passageways. That's the treasure that they were supposed to find. Now it said that Al-Mu'min, so that his workers didn't kill him or something, put different amounts of money in different parts of the passageway so that they wouldn't, have total anarchy. So they didn't come out empty-handed. Now, in order to obtain this wealth of information that I'm talking about, we need a 0 point. We need a point to start measuring from so that we can start from there and continue to get a length and then convert that to a date. This 0 point was established by Piazzi Smith, and he was the first one to measure the pyramid with accurate measuring tools. This was in 1864. He established the 0 point, which is the exact moment between December 31st, 1 BC, and January 1st, between 1 AD. Now it's real important to remember that there's no 0 year. What Piazzi Smith did was he projected a floor line from the Queen's Chamber until it intersected with the ascending passageway, and that he determined to be the 0 point. From there, he continued to start measuring. He would measure, okay, I'm going to start at 0, I'm going to measure to that block and see what I get. Now, what he did was he started measuring things, getting dates, and then matching them with actual events in history. Now, how do we do this? Okay, if I get a pyramid, a measurement that is, say, 33.222 pyramid inches. Now, what this means is it's 33 years plus 0.222 portion of the next year. So that number would actually be 34 AD, because remember, there's no 0 year, so we add a year. Then we take the 0.222, times it by 365. You whip out your calculator, you get 81. If you count 81 days into the calendar, you'll then get March 21st. So the pyramid inch that would say 33.222 is actually March 21st, 34 AD. So we're going to get some dates by doing some of these measurements. The first date that Piazzi Smith figured out was the actual date for the point when Jesus was aware of his ministry. And this is when John the Baptist baptized him in the River Jordan. By simply measuring from the 0 point to the end of the ascending passageway, or where the Grand Gallery begins, you get 29.772 pyramid inches. This date equals September 21st, 30 AD. And this is a point, like I said, when John the Baptist baptized Jesus in the River Jordan. And this is ratified in the Bible in Luke 3:23 when he says, Jesus, when he began his ministry, was about 30 years of age. Now his death was also fixed in stone. If you trace a line, again, from the first overlay, now in the Grand Gallery, if you look up, the blocks are kind of overlaying like that. So if you trace down a line straight down to where it intersects with the ascending passageway, and then again measure from the 0 point, it's only 3.5 pyramid inches difference from the first date that I gave you. What this equals, it gives us a date of March 21st, 34 AD. Jesus' ministry only lasted 3.5 years, and then he was crucified. So this is the actual date for Jesus' crucifixion, March 21st, 34 AD. And there it is, right in the pyramid. And again, this date is ratified by the prophet Daniel in his book in the Bible in chapter 9, verse 24. So these are just, this is just the tip of the iceberg. We can also venture into the Grand Gallery and get the dates for each of the 9 manifestations of God. The dates for their proclamations are in the pyramid. How we get those is these overlays have a certain length. And we measure the overlay and we'll get a certain number. Now remember at the beginning of the ascending passageway, this is the chunk of it right down here, there was the 3 granite blocks, then these 4 girdle stones. Those help us obtain the dates for the pyramid. By measuring the length of the overlay and subtracting the distance from the girdle stone to the beginning of the ascending passageway, we'll get the date for that particular manifestation's proclamation. So for Moses, for instance, his overlay is equal to 1878 pyramid inches. The distance from the girdle stone to the ascending passageway is 422.222. Subtract those two, you get 1455. So the date for Moses' proclamation was March 21st, 1456 BC. Now we can do this again for Krishna, just so you make sure you understand the pattern. The Krishna overlay is 1871.00 pyramid inches. The distance from the girdle stone to the beginning of the ascended passageway is 625.222. If we subtract those two, we get 1245.778. This is March 21st, 1246 BC. And again, this is the date that Krishna actually made his proclamation as being a manifestation of God. So you can see how important every single thing in the pyramid is laid out specifically to get these exact dates, because this is exactly when these things happened. Now, that gives us 7 different manifestations. Well, I said that there was 9. The dates for those 2 are actually outside of the Grand Gallery. As we continue up the ascending passageway, this is the ascending passageway, the Grand Gallery is back here, we come upon a big step, and it's called the altar stone. If we measure from the 0 point to the base of the altar stone, we get the number 1843.222. This is the date for the proclamation of the manifestation called the Bob. On this date, in 1844, the Millerites, who were an American group, actually donned their ascension robes, got up on the hilltops, and when they were sure that 1844 was the date, the arrival of the second Christ, they had the date right, wrong guy. But they knew something important was going to happen. Also, at this point, the first telegram was sent, and the telegram said, "Behold what God hath wrought." And what Ted Goth wrought? It was the manifestation of the Bob. He made his proclamation on March 21st in 1844. But somebody might say, well, wait a minute. Muhammad said, "I'm the seal of the prophets." He said he was the seal of the prophets. Does that mean nobody else is supposed to come after him? No. What this means is that Muhammad was the seal or the close of the age of prophecy. And the Bab who followed him began the age of fulfillment. Now this difference is actually mirrored in the design of the pyramid. Remember, all the other dates for the manifestations were found in the Grand Gallery. Then we go outside of that to the great step to get the dates for the Bob. So it certainly isn't that we leave the Grand Gallery behind. It's just that the tour isn't quite ended there. Now the final manifestation in this cycle is Baha'u'llah. And we get his date in the King's Chamber. Again, this is the Grand Gallery. This guy's going up this great step. That's the date for the Bob right there, the 1843.222. If we continue to measure from the base of the altar stone to the beginning of the king's chamber. There's a line right here. There's these two big stones that you actually have to duck under to get into the king's chamber. This gives you the number 1862.30677, or April 21st, 1863. And this again, just like before, is the date that Baha'u'llah made his proclamation. So now we can see why the pyramid is on the dollar bill. It's a hint for us to investigate the pyramid for all the information that it contains. Now, although the drawing on the dollar bill is actually pretty simple, the details that they do include are actually quite interesting and there for a specific reason. So if we look at the pyramid side of the dollar bill on the seal, if we count the layers of stone that are actually depicted in that picture, there are 13 of them. And again, this is another one of the 13s that appear in the whole seal. Now, if we actually count the number of bricks that are on the dollar, we'll get 72. Now, when you double this, you'll get 144. Now, 144 is a number that appears twice in this pyramid. And 144 is a clue to the book of Revelations, where it says that 144,000 angels must be gathered before the four winds of destruction are let loose. So this is a very important number in prophecy. Now, the Roman numerals that are on the base of the pyramid are supposed to add up to 1776, because this is the point where we had our founding fathers, made our country, and all that good stuff. But if we actually break down the Roman numerals and write them out as I have here, we can see some very interesting patterns that start arising. For instance, when you lay out what the Roman numerals equal, there are actually 12 zeros. And 12 times 12 gives you that other 144. Now, secondly, as I said, these Roman numerals are supposed to represent 1776. If you add the digits of that, 1 plus 7 plus 7 plus 6, you get 21. 21 is a significant number because the 21st century is when we're supposed to have the kingdom. Yeah, really have it. There's a Baha'i writing that says, "This century is the century for the Son of Truth. This century is the century of the establishment of the kingdom of God on earth." In this century. So in the 21st, we'll actually be living it. Now, another interesting thing about these numbers is the 1,000 that appears on the top line. 1,000 is the number of years that are prophesied before the arrival of the next manifestation. So we aren't supposed to have another manifestation for 1,000 years. So anyone who claims to be such, we know is false. And then also, if you take the 1,000 times 500, which is just the next number right in that list, you get 500,000. And this is the length of the time that Baha'u'llah's dispensation is supposed to last. It's such a great revelation, it's supposed to last 500,000 years. And the last thing is, in the pattern of all the numbers, you continue to get 151, 151, 151. If you add up 1 plus 5 plus 1, you get 7. And this is a reference to someone who's mentioned in the book of Revelations called the seventh angel. And this is a person who's supposed to act as his mission as the establisher of the Baha'i faith. And this is someone who exists in this world today. Now, back up to the seal, we can see the great eye above. Now, this is supposed to be in Masonic lore the great architect of the universe, or in other words, God. This eye is also a dual symbol. It's a symbol of both the blessing and the curse. There's a blessing that there is a man who is the eye of the pyramid, who's been able to uncrack the codes that we've just gone through and look within. And it's no coincidence that this man was actually born in Racine, Wisconsin, where, remember, we proved that Enoch came and gathered the rhyolite used in the pyramid from exactly that area. The plan of God is immense. Now, the curse, like I said, it's a blessing and a curse, is that there's an evil eye. And this is a symbol of those who oppose the Creator's plan. Now, in Oriental medicine, this symbol, or this condition, is a condition where if you look straight ahead at somebody, like if you're looking at me, hopefully you can't see the whites of my eyes beneath my pupil. But if you look at somebody who does have that, then they are in Oriental medicine, it's called Sanpaku. And this is a symbol of really unbalanced. They're just really messed up. They say that if you see someone who's driving a taxi and the driver is driving the taxi and he's Sanpaku, they say get another cab because there's this extreme mental or physical unbalance. And this is exactly how the eye is drawn above the pyramid on the back of the dollar bill. It's Sanpaku. Now, I'm going to give you an example of this, a really good example, and it's nothing against Michael Jackson, but he happens to be Sanpaku. If you look at this picture of him, it's right out of the newspaper, he's got these whites of the eyes underneath him. And so he's got this condition. But in the pyramid, it's a symbol for the unbalance in the world today. Now back at the seal, above we've got some Latin, and that is Annuit Keptus. And this means he, meaning God, has favored our undertaking. Now Annuit Keptus also has 13 letters, another one of the 13s. This undertaking that God favors is the establishment of His kingdom on earth. This isn't just a myth, it's an actual physical thing that's going to happen. And the other Latin, lower on the seal, is Novus Ordo Seclorum. And this translates to New Order of the Ages. This new order is a civilization. And it's a civilization that's the kingdom of God on earth. I've said it before, I'm going to say it again. This kingdom is actually physically a kingdom. It has a king over a domain. And this king is a descendant of King David. And this person is called the guardian of the Baha'i faith. Continues this descendant of King David. The guardian's job is to guard the newly established kingdom from corruption, usurpation, and violation of the plan of God. But we need a purification to get there, because we're promised this, but all we've got is a mess right now. Now the dominant symbol on the obverse side of the seal is the phoenix. But above the phoenix's head, or actually in its mouth, he's holding some more Latin, which is E pluribus unum. And this means out of many, one. This means that the idea is not for us to be all scattered and different and have all these different sects of religion. One of the first principles in the Baha'i faith, after an independent investigation of the truth, is the oneness of humanity. This is a very unique principle to the faith. We want unity. We want to have this unified plan of God, where everyone is serving their purpose. Now, above the phoenix's head is 13 stars. And these are actually, in the original version, were actually 6-pointed stars that have been now changed to 5-pointed stars. And this was not intended to be changed by the designer. The designer specifically said, as to the number of points whereof a star consisteth, we must observe that they must never be fewer than 6. But again, it was one of those two obvious things. 6-pointed star, making a 6-pointed star, we better cover that up a little bit. So yes, it does actually make a 6-pointed star. If we trace the pattern of the stars on the, let's move a little bit, above the phoenix's head, we get a 6-pointed star, made up of 6-pointed stars. And this is the Star of David. But why is the Star of David on the back of the dollar bill? That's because it falls in line with the extremely important promise that God made to King David. And this is in Psalms 89. He says, I have made a covenant with my chosen one. I have sworn to David my servant, I will establish your descendants forever and build your throne for all generations. Now God does not break His promises. The lineage of David has continued in an unbroken father-to-son chain all the way to today. Jesus was a descendant of David, and this is why he had the title Christ. Christ means a male sperm descendant of David who is anointed. Jesus didn't sit on the throne. He said his kingdom was not of this world, but he was indeed a Christ. He couldn't be the Son of God, because that would have to make God a descendant of David in order for Jesus to get that title. It just doesn't work that way. Jesus was physically a descendant of the male sperm descendant of David, and he got this through his father Joseph. Now Baha'u'llah was fulfilling the prophecies for the second Christ. He was the second Christ who also, you can prove it through his genealogy, which we have, that he followed in an unbroken line, a father-to-son chain, all the way directly from the throne of King David himself. And Baha'u'llah sat on the throne himself. He inherited it from his father, and he in turn passed it on to his sons. Now, back up on the seal, surrounding the Star of David is a burst of light or glory. Now, it's interesting, there's a couple interesting things about this burst of light, but you notice it's the only symbol which is actually repeated, so it must be pretty important. This burst of light or glory represents the glorious message of the manifestations. But notice what's around the glory are clouds. Now, what do clouds do? They block the light. And who blocks the light other than the clergy with their misinformation, their disinformation, and their downright lies? Now, I'm going to give you a really easy example of this, of these clouds that they just want to veil your intellect, but you've got an intellect and you've got to use it. An example, a real easy example of this is the resurrection myth. Everybody knows it, okay? Jesus, he died on Friday, he rose from the dead, crawled out of the tomb on Sunday, and the body disappeared, and it was amazing he rose from the dead, right? Well, that's the myth. Now we're going to find out what the real story is. We're going to break those clouds away. And all we have to do is listen to what Jesus himself said. He said in John 6:63, "The flesh is of no avail. It is the words that I have spoken to you which are spirit and light." So the words Jesus spoke give us the answer to the parable of the resurrection. And he gave it to us. The apostles were sitting around asking him questions, and they wanted a sign. And Jesus said, "An evil and adulterous generation seeks for a sign, but no sign shall be given to it except the sign of the prophet Jonah. For as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the whale, so shall the Son of Man be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth." Okay, so we need to know what's a day. And we're told this. He says, "Are there not 12 hours in a day?" So we know we're in the 24-hour scale. So, how many hours are there in 3 days and 3 nights? Well, that would be 72 by simple mathematics. So 72 hours is the prophesied length of time. Now we know that Jesus died at 3 o'clock on Friday. How do we know this? Well, the date for his crucifixion, remember, is given in the pyramid. And this was March 21st, 34 AD. Well, March 21st, this is the equinox, and the sun rises at 6 a.m. And in the Bible, it says that, Matthew says that it was about the 9th hour when he yielded up his spirit. So 9 hours from 6 a.m. is 3 o'clock. And then he was discovered missing about 6 a.m. on Sunday. Well, if we count, just literally count the number of hours from 3 p.m. on Friday to 6 a.m. on Sunday, we only get 39, not the prophesied 72. So we know that the flesh is of no avail. This isn't what the parable was trying to teach. What resurrected was the body of believers. And how this worked was like this. On Thursday night, the night of the Last Supper, Jesus had all of his apostles together, and all of them fell away. Even Peter denied him 3 times. So before Jesus died, he had not a single believer in all the world. Nobody understood his mission. They wanted him to be the reigning Messiah. They knew that two Christs were prophesied, one to be reigning, one to be suffering. Well, of course, everybody wants the reigning Messiah in their day. They don't want to deal with the suffering guy. So they wanted Jesus to be the one to redeem Israel. So on Thursday night, there was no one who understood who Jesus was. Then on Sunday night, the apostles were in the upper chambers, it says in the book of Acts. This means they were in their intellect. They were using their third eye to finally figure out what Jesus was trying to teach them. They finally realized that Jesus was indeed the suffering Messiah. They understood his mission, and the body of believers arose again. And from Thursday night to Sunday night does indeed fit the criteria Jesus himself told us that existed: 3 days and 3 nights. So you can see how easy it is to push away the clouds, think for yourselves, ask questions. That's what the show is all about. Now we can go on to further symbols on the Great Seal. And the next one I want to talk about is the olive branch that the phoenix is holding. This olive branch is another sign of the Davidic kingship, because the kings were literally anointed with olive oil. This reiterates the role of the descendants from King David, who are now called guardians of the Baha'i faith. What's interesting is that it's also a branch, which is actually an allusion to the criteria used to appoint the successors to the guardianship. Because the throne of David is supposed to last forever, the guardianship is the replacement or the continuation of that. So there has to be a criteria so that this throne does continue. This criteria is that the guardian must appoint a successor in his lifetime. And you notice the branch is a living thing. And the second criteria is that he must appoint a son. And the Persian word for branch is son. So this olive branch has many meanings. Now what's interesting is that the eagle isn't empty-handed. He's very tightly holding this olive branch in one hand and this bunch of arrows in the other. This bunch of arrows represents the power of the many nations. And the two of them together, the olive branch and the arrows, symbolize two essential elements for the kingdom of God. This is the guardian and its appointed and its supported body, which is made up of members of many nations, called the Universal House of Justice. The guardian is the head, and the body, the representatives of many nations, is the body. You have to have a head and a body together. Abdu'l-Baha talks about such a union of taking something that's wood and something that has, he calls it iron. This is a prophecy. I'm going to read from the selections of the writings of Abdu'l-Baha, where he talks about this. He says, certain personages guided the people with a staff grown out of the earth, and shepherded them with a rod, like unto the rod of Moses. Others trained and shepherded the people with the rod of iron, as in the dispensation of Muhammad. And in this present cycle, because it is the mightiest of dispensations, that rod grown out of the vegetable kingdom and that rod of iron will be transformed into a rod of purest gold, taken from out of the endless treasure houses of the kingdom of the Lord. By this rod the people will be trained. So we've got this symbolized in the dollar bill. We've got the phoenix holding this rod of wood, the olive branch, and in the other hand he's holding this rod of iron, the many nations, and above the phoenix is this burst of gold, this burst of glory. And this is the golden branch that is prophesied. This is the union of the guardianship with the universal house of justice. And this is what has to exist. You have to have both. This is a living guardianship. If someone says that they have a universal house of justice, the first question you should ask them is, your guardian alive or dead? And you know from what I've told you tonight that the guardian must be alive. Anything else, any other variation in the slightest degree is a corruption. And that again is why these clouds are encompassing this gold, this burst of glory. Because this corruption has actually taken place in today. In the Baha'i faith, there's a corrupt universal house of justice without a living guardian. They have a dead man as their guardian. That's not the way it's supposed to be. But it's not going to stay that way either. Because if you look, the dominant symbol on the back of the dollar bill, on that side of it, is this phoenix. Now, I keep saying it's a phoenix because you might look at a dollar bill now and it's an eagle, but again, they tried to hide it a little bit more. This is what you're seeing is the original symbol. And it's drawn very much similar to this phoenix, which is right out of a book on symbols, which is a representation of a phoenix. Why is a phoenix on the back of the dollar bill? Because we're not going to be left with this corruption. The legend of the phoenix gives us a clue to how this corruption will be taken care of. The legend goes like this. The phoenix is a bird that lived for centuries, and then it senses its impending death. It builds a nest of flames, which it plunges into willingly. This fire consumes all of the bird except one last spark of light, or soul. And from this one last spark, a new bird arises, and the bird goes on to live again. This is a symbol of the regeneration after decay. It's new life from the wreckage of old. This corruption that I just mentioned will be wrecked by the hand of God through these four winds. These four winds of catastrophe are a nuclear war that's going to be limited by the grace of God to 1 hour. A great meteor will crash to the earth, and this is well known that we're being bombarded. There's a big asteroid shower right now that came from the comet Swift-Tuttle, in fact, which came very close to the earth. This asteroid will then crash into the earth, stop the war, and then we will have earthquakes. And then another great blessing is the earth will actually shift crust. And this will act like a rototiller effect. It will bury the nuclear waste. Then we can start over. Then we can have the kingdom of God on earth. No, it's not a happy picture, but we've got to have both. This is a message of both the kingdom and the catastrophes. It's the only way. It's the only way. So then we can have the kingdom that can be established, that has always been in the plan of God, and that you've been carrying around in your back pocket. And now you know to look at it a little more closely. Thanks.
Well, that was a wonderful presentation. You can see a replay of this program this Saturday at 1 p.m. here on MCAT. The guest for our next show will be Dave Cornell, who will speak on the mystery of the papacy unveiled. And that's next Friday, August 20th at 7 p.m., only here on MCAT. Also, every Sunday we have a worship service at 620 South 3rd West at 10 a.m. During these services there is music, readings from the Baha'i writings, and a short introductory talk on the Baha'i faith. And this Sunday's talk will be Apocalypse When? Again, that's Sunday at 10 a.m. at 620 South 3rd West, and everyone is welcome. So if you have any questions about tonight's show or want other information about the Baha'i faith, please call the Baha'i Center at 721-5737. Now we're going to be opening up our lines for questions, and please call in with your questions tonight. Annie, you were talking about the 1844 date in the pyramid. Now, when did they discover the 1844 date in the pyramid?
That was when Piazzi Smith was measuring things, and actually I'm not sure exactly who found that date.
So was it before or after 1844?
I believe it would have been, let's see, it would have probably been after.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because he came along, he did the most extensive measurings in 1864.
Piazzi Smith.
Right.
Okay. So having found this 1844 date, it wouldn't have been before 1844 date, so they wouldn't have been, saying, oh, this is going to be the day, but it was after the fact. So they said, oh, that was the day, or that would have been the day, or something like that.
Well, some people knew that this was an important date. This was a date prophesied in many religions as being an important date, but it took quite a while for anyone to really realize what matched up with it. And a lot of different people decided, oh, it must mean this. It must mean Christ is going to return, or it must mean that we're going to get raptured, or a variety of different things.
Yeah.
But what had actually happened was that the Bab made his proclamation. Okay. And the significance hindsight's 20/20.
Yeah.
So we often find
That's
out
for sure.
much later what actually happened.
So it looks like we have a caller on line 1. Hello, you're on the air.
Yeah, I'm curious, why did the government use these symbols on the dollar bill? I mean, did they know about this whole thing, and why haven't I heard about it before?
Okay, thank you for your question.
Well, that's a great question. Why haven't we heard about this before? And that's what I said in the beginning, was because that our founding fathers were primarily Freemasons, and including George Washington, Ben Franklin, all these guys were Freemasons, and they had a very secretive society. It's like the guys' club, we're going to keep it secret from everybody else. So they went ahead and put these, they knew the symbols, what they meant, and they put them on the dollar bill, but they put them in a way that was a little bit harder for us to understand clearly. So yeah, the government definitely knew what these meant. Remember that letter that I said was lost, where the meaning, he said, I wish to express what was covertly meant by the seal? They knew exactly what was going on, and they buried it, because they don't want you to think. They don't want you to know. They want you to depend on them for their mercy, but the only thing you can depend on is the plan of God, not the plan of the government. Thanks.
Yeah, you mentioned also that there was a number of different references to the number 13 on the dollar bill and the seal. Well, it's interesting that today is Friday the 13th, which is one of those days, that people have a lot of doom and negative
you're right.
things about.
That's right.
But this show is talking about the different aspects of 13. Now, 13, you said, was a number of death and rebirth or something like that?
Right. In numerology, which is the science of numbers, they give different meanings to the different numbers. And you're right, death and rebirth, or purification after refinement. So it's both a negative thing and a positive thing. Like I'm saying, we have to have both the kingdom and the catastrophes. The phoenix is a bird that lives for centuries. It's a great thing, and then it goes into the flames, and then it's reborn again. So it's a very hopeful message, and that's why 13 is there so many times. I didn't even know that today was the 13th.
Yeah.
I think I was dating everything to 12 today. Yeah. So it's kind of funny.
Okay, looks like we have another caller on line 1. Hello, you're on the air.
Hi, last week I tried to call in about your press release, and then I went and I looked in the paper. How come I never see your press releases?
In the paper?
Yeah.
Well, that's a good question. Thanks for calling. That is a good question. Why don't they print our press releases in the paper? The press releases that we send in have a lot of different, very interesting information about. And for instance, we sent in the press release warning the people of New York that February 26th was going to be the day that New York was going to be bombed. And on that very day, on February 26th, New York was bombed. Exactly the day that we said it was going to be bombed. Now we're sending out a press release saying that New York is going to be bombed again. But this time they're not going to be so nice. This time, because the United States literally peppered Iraq with over 40 tons of depleted uranium in their DU projectiles, they're going to give like for like. And they're going to detonate a thermonuclear weapon in New York. And that's what we're saying. And you're hearing it here on this show today, which is what? Friday the 13th. For 3 years, our press releases have been muted. We've been silenced for 3 years. Nobody is wanting to listen to what we're saying, because what we're saying is that there is going to be this purification, just like Annie was talking about. That the number 13 is a number of death and rebirth. And that with this catastrophe, our earth will die of this civilization. A civilization that is probably not a very good word for. It's not really a civilization because there's nothing civil about it. Rampant rapes, wars, destruction, pillage, carnage, starvation. That's what this quote-unquote civilization is all about. And this is what's going to come to an end. But what's going to be reborn is a true civilization. A civilization that will give humanity its true purpose. It will give humanity the chance that it hasn't had. This is the message that the world's waiting for. So the other question that I had was, you talked about the clouds on the symbol, and you said that the clouds are what surrounds these bursts of glory. Now, doesn't it say in Revelations that Jesus is going to come on the clouds? What is that talking about?
Well, these clouds are these clouds of misconception, that come. They say that Jesus was God. They say that Jesus physically resurrected. Well, these are the clouds of misconception that, again, who gives it to you but the clergy? I'm not a clergy person. Victor's not a clergy person. We don't get paid for this. We do it voluntarily because we want to share this information with you for free. So these clouds are, again, a repeating pattern of this misinformation and disinformation and downright lies that we get from people who don't want you to think for yourself.
Yeah, that's it's a wonderful explanation. The Jews 2,000 years ago were looking up into the sky, waiting for the return of Elijah to come streaking across the sky in a flaming chariot, and they take these different things literally. They never look into the intellectual meaning behind it. That's what God gave us our mind for. It looks like we have another caller on line 1. Hello, you're on the air.
Hi, I understand you guys sent a press release about the February 26th bombing, and I want to know, how do you guys know it's going to be a nuclear bomb this time?
Okay, thank you for your question. It's going to be a thermonuclear weapon because this is what's prophesied to happen. It says in the prophecies of Nostradamus that the great new city at the 45th parallel will be destroyed completely by a great fire. In the book of Revelations, it talks about this as well. It talks about how that this is going to be one of the vials that's poured out upon the sun, or it will have the power of the sun. And what is the sun but a gigantic ball with nothing but these thermonuclear explosions going on continuously? The Bible talks about the thermonuclear explosions on and on and on, all the time. For instance, it talks about how that the people will be fed with wormwood. And I don't know how many people out there are familiar with some of the news that has come out, but in 1986, I'm sure you're familiar with this, there was the great Chernobyl disaster. But one newspaper article that came out talking about this Chernobyl disaster was talking about a man who in the Ukraine pulled out a dictionary and he showed how that the Ukrainian word for wormwood in the Ukrainian dictionary was Chernobyl. So this is a very specific sign to the people of this world that what we are going to be experiencing is not any more of these conventional weapons, these conventional explosions, but thermonuclear weapons are going to be used. Now, in the first chapter of the book of Ezekiel, it talks about how that there will be these 4 creatures that come out from this great fire. And these 4 creatures are a lion, an eagle, an ox, and the face of a man. And these are the exact same 4 creatures that are mentioned in the book of Revelations. And these 4 creatures are living creatures because they have come out of this great burning bronze-like orangish fire that he sees. And it says that it's burning round about, and he describes it. And he describes it with clouds and everything like this. He's describing a great nuclear explosion. That these 4 creatures come out of this great catastrophe being purified in the fires. from beast nations, they come out as living creatures. Before they're beast nations as a lion with eagle's wings, a bear, and a leopard. And these are the four nations of England, France, the United States, and Russia. These four nations are going to be purified in this thermonuclear lake of fire that is coming upon us very, very soon. Now, we have been saying this for a long time, and this is about to take place. And this is why we keep writing these press releases, but they don't get printed because of what we're saying to them. They don't want to print that kind of information. They don't want to say that New York is going to be destroyed by a thermonuclear weapon. Can you imagine the kind of reaction that people would have? But can you imagine that if they were warned, how many people would be saved?
Well, it's kind of like how our press releases haven't been getting printed. It doesn't mean that we're not have anything valid to say. It's just like in the symbols on the dollar bill, the message is hidden per se, but it certainly means that there's plenty there to be said and to be heard. And it's certainly not always a cheery message, but we're not talking about the end of the world here. We're talking about purifications, and these purifications are necessary, a necessary element for us to get to this kingdom.
Right.
But this message is often, nobody wants to hear it. They want to hide it, they want to bury it in myths and symbols, or just don't print it, But the time to be mute is over with. It's no longer. This message must be out. And that's what the Baha'i Phone In Live show is about, is getting this message out.
Mm-hmm. That's the time of the great projection. And this is the time in when it talks about how that the seventh angel pours his bowl into the air. And the information that is going out in these press releases and the information that's on this program, I know it's cable, but there's cable telecasts in the systems like that, and this goes out onto the air. When we're on television, it says on the air, And when I say the people calling on the phone, I say you're on the air, and that type of thing. And it says that the seventh angel pours his bowl into the air. And then it will be done. After that, our message will not be muted any longer. This message will be the most important message the world has ever heard. You were saying something about how that our hindsight is so much greater than our foresight. And it's so true. It's like everyone can always look back and say, oh, if we had been back there, we would have accepted him, or we wouldn't have rejected him, or we would have done the right things. The hindsight is always the right thing. Can you imagine putting yourself back in the place of the people 2,000 years ago? Would you have been the ones to reject Jesus? I ask this to many Christians, and they say, oh, no, I wouldn't have rejected him. But of course you would have. Just like on the return of Jesus, you would have done the same thing. Now, today is different. This is why this great projection is going to have to happen, and why this destruction of New York is going to be the great message to the world. Now, the trade tower bombings in New York was an omen for New York. Now, New York, the destruction of New York, is going to be an omen for the entire world. And that is the message that we have. Now, this is coming out of the United States, and this is why all this information is on this great seal. It's coming from the United States. And it looks like we have another caller on line 1. Hello, you're on the air.
Hi, I'd like to know, I was just wondering, do the Native American Indians know about these catastrophes?
Okay, thank you for your question. Would you like to answer that?
In fact, that's quite well known among the Native Americans, and what they call it, their term for it is the purifications. They have prophecies for something called a gourd of ashes. In the Hopi prophecies, they know that this gourd of ashes, when it comes, it will fall from the sky, it will burn the land, and nothing will grow there for many years. Well, the Hopis, their prophecies are so accurate that 3/4 of all other tribes follow them. So when the bomb dropped on Hiroshima, they knew that this was the fulfillment of the Gourd of Ashes. So they had to take their message to another element of their prophecy, which was the house of mica. What's mica? Mica is a glass-like mineral, and the United Nations building in New York City is the place that's made entirely out of glass. And this house of mica is where they went to tell their prophecies. They were rejected 3 times, and they weren't recognized as a sovereign nation, so they said there's no longer any hope for world peace. So they expect these purifications to come. They have stories of how their people would be built a wonderful place for the Creator, given all the gifts. Then the two-hearted ones would arise, and this world would have to be wiped out. They've gone through this time and time again. It's a very common element in their prophecies. And again, it's a very hopeful thing, because what will happen is it combines their prophecies. The Gourd of Ashes will be dropped on the house of mica. And this happens in New York City.
A lot of people have said that the Gourd of Ashes was the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombings, but in the Old Testament, in the book of Revelations, it doesn't talk just about one place, some obscure island nation that's going to get bombed, but it talks about the whole world. It talks about 2/3 of the people being killed. 1/3 of the entire world's population will be destroyed in 1 hour. And that's what it says. And you can't get around the fact that it's not just Japan that's going to get this Gourd of Ashes, but the whole world. Okay, the prophecies are very specific, not just for the destruction, but for the coming of these people. Baha'u'llah, the second Christ who's already come, and the return of Jesus who walks the earth today. And we can prove this, and this is why we have these firesides. So again, we have a Sunday worship service. And this is at 620 South 3rd West at 10 a.m. And we'd like you to come to the services, and this is this Sunday at 10 a.m. And that's about it. We're going to have to wrap it up, I guess. It's time to go. Okay, well, that was a really good talk.
Thanks.